Imagine a pig almost as soon as it's born. It doesn't need time and can start walking. An elephant can stand and join the herd just a few minutes after birth. Camels can wander around on their own just a few hours after being born, with absurd body proportions like a giraffe. But what about human babies? It's almost impossible for a human baby without parental care to survive on its own for a few hours, maybe more than a few days. Human babies can't even hold their heads up for about 2 months after birth. It takes around 1,000 hours, or about 41 days, just to observe a proper locomotion movement. By the time they achieve turning from their backs to their stomachs, they are already 4 months old. They can only start supporting their weight with their legs after 9 months, and it may take at least 12 months, sometimes much longer, for them to walk as we know it. So, does it end when they start walking? For a baby to reach and feed itself, it takes 24 months after birth. Within the cultural structure we call society, it may take about 10 years or even longer for a human offspring to be able to stand on its own. But why are our babies so helpless compared to the rest of the animal kingdom? There's a phenomenon that began with our ancestors transitioning from forests to savannas a few weeks ago. It's called persistent bipedalism, meaning we learn to walk on 2 legs permanently. One surprising side effect of this permanent bipedalism, when combined with other factors, is the astonishing enlargement of the human brain, a whopping 7.5 times larger on average than other primates. Of course, such a significant anatomical anomaly brought about many changes. For instance, due to the increasing caloric needs of our brains and the shift in our habitat from forests to savannas, our frugivorous diet turned into a more meat-centric, omnivorous diet. The reduction in our jaw and jaw muscles resulted in the atrophy of organs like our appendices and wisdom teeth, as seen in the vestigial organs video. However, there is a frequently overlooked aspect of this process. While we may be accustomed to our large heads, the tiny heads formed during the embryonic period need to transform into these colossal heads. If the steps of an organism's development are related to survival and/or reproduction, they are shaped by the law of evolution in nature. The science born from the merging of evolutionary biology and developmental biology today is called evolutionary developmental biology, or simply Evo-Devo. The details of this magnificent field could be the subject of another video, but a problem arises regarding the survival of large-headed humans at birth. The problem is that, with persistent bipedalism, the vaginal opening in females begins to be positioned between the legs. Look at other animals still quadrupedal, living on all fours, their opening always stays relatively behind 2 legs. Even a large giraffe can comfortably give birth while standing, thanks to this positioning. However, since we started standing on 2 legs, the pelvic bones of females began to play a restrictive role in reproductive organs. The graph excellently illustrates this situation. In the graph, we see the birth canal width of 8 different primate species. They are represented by the outer ovals. The elongated part of the oval represents the animal's front-to-back diameter, while the flatter part represents the side-to-side opening. The solid black shape inside each oval shows the average size of the offspring's head at birth. For instance, in monkeys, the size of the baby's head almost matches the mother's uterine width. In our closest relatives, orangutans, chimpanzees, and gorillas, the baby's head is significantly smaller than the birth canal. Thus, they can easily give birth. However, you might be thinking about the obvious problem in humans. Due to persistent bipedalism, the birth canal is too narrow, and due to the evolution of our brains, the heads are too large. This is called the obstetric dilemma. To solve this dilemma, either our brains and consequently our heads need to shrink, or the hips need to widen. Initially, females' hips did widen to accommodate the baby, but as we saw in the videos on the evolution of our brains, there was such a strong selection pressure that human babies' brains could not shrink further. Here, a third option evolved: our babies started to be born before completing their embryonic development. This is actually the main reason for their post-birth helplessness. Consider that the development of the human brain continues until around the mid to late 20s. While other animals' brains continue to develop after birth, ours take much longer to start basic functions after birth, and more importantly, our brains can only begin their functions after birth. In other words, for our babies to be born with brains advanced enough to do what the offspring of our other cousins can do at birth, human pregnancy would need to last not 9 months as it currently does but twice as long, between 18 and 21 months. But if this were the case, our heads would have grown so large by the time our babies were born that we would tear our mother's birth canals even more, leading to their deaths. Therefore, until just a few centuries ago, deaths due to childbirth were among the most common causes of death for women. Even today, complications during pregnancy remain one of the top 10 causes of death for women between the ages of 44. 1 in every 50 women in this age range still dies due to pregnancy-related complications. In summary, much like what we saw in the video about why women menstruate, we encounter a strong evolutionary conflict between the offspring and the mother. To increase their chances of survival, our babies need to be as advanced as possible in their brains when they are born. However, for mothers to give birth to these offspring in a healthy way, the babies' heads need to be small enough at the time of birth. Here, we learn a crucial truth about natural selection. People usually think of evolution through natural selection as a unidirectional event, such as longer necks, smaller individuals, larger wings, and so on. This is entirely incorrect. Natural selection has 3 different submechanisms, and selection in one direction continuously towards enlargement, reduction, elongation, or shortening of a particular feature, namely directional selection, is just one of them. For example, the reason for our baby's helplessness is a mechanism called stabilizing natural selection. This type of selection works in the direction of eliminating 2 extreme ends, meaning it's not advantageous for our babies' heads to enlarge too much or be too small. Therefore, very small-headed babies are more likely to die without being able to survive, and very large-headed babies unintentionally kill their mothers and most likely die in the wild without maternal care. Thus, natural selection works to keep a feature within a certain range. That's why we call it stabilizing selection. There are also situations where being average is disadvantageous, and being at either extreme is advantageous. For example, in dense forests, it is advantageous for plants to be very tall because they can easily reach the sun, conducting more photosynthesis than their competitors. Being very short is also advantageous because they can easily access resources in the soil without much effort to transport those resources to their leaves and branches. However, being of average height is not advantageous because you cannot benefit from the sun, and you need to make more effort to carry the minerals from the soil to the unnecessary length of the body, making you disadvantaged against dwarf plants. Being average harms you in every way. This type of selection is called disruptive or diversifying selection. As you can imagine, this kind of selection greatly reinforces the evolution of new species from ancestral species. It pushes those at the extremes even further and prevents them from mixing with each other. Especially in species with rapidly increasing population sizes, this type of selection is commonly observed, and completely new species can evolve from those ancestors. What happens with our babies is, as I said, stabilizing selection. But once human babies are born, relevant genes begin to activate, and they go through an incredibly rapid development process. Because now that limiting factor is gone, they start rapidly losing those helpless aspects and, in just a few months, transform into a more intelligent being than all our cousins and, within a few years, into an organism that can potentially dominate the entire world. I will delve into the development journey from the zygote to the first few years of a human in another video. So, if you don't want to miss such videos, don't forget to turn on channel notifications now. Of course, there are other hypotheses regarding the helplessness of human babies. For instance, One hypothesis suggests that the determining factor for the timing of birth is not the size of the head but the metabolic limits of the mother. For example, in human embryos, metabolic tools begin to increase exponentially after the second trimester, i.e., from 13 to 28 weeks onwards. However, it's not possible for our mothers to sustain this increasing metabolic need of the embryo indefinitely because there is an upper limit to the metabolic capacity of the human species. This limit can increase up to approximately twice the resting level of metabolism. Beyond that point, our internal balance, or homeostasis, begins to deteriorate. Therefore, our mothers cannot continue much further beyond that point. Interestingly enough, the point where the metabolic needs of the embryo in the mother's womb reach approximately twice the resting metabolism of our mothers corresponds roughly to the 38th to 40th weeks of pregnancy. Guess what? A healthy human baby is indeed ready to be born between 38 and 40 weeks. Moreover, being so helpless is not unique to humans. In other species, we can observe helpless offspring for various reasons. For example, the offspring of spiny mice are almost entirely blind and born naked. They die quickly without their mother's body heat and remain dependent on their parents for a long time. Or, when we look beyond mammals to birds, we see that many chicks cannot survive without parental care. Although, birds like chickens can quickly stand on their own, and ducklings can jump into the water and swim shortly after birth, following their parents. But, for instance, songbirds like bullfinches or bluebirds are born almost completely naked, with closed eyes, and can do little more than lift their heads to receive food from their parents. In birds, what determines this helplessness is not the size of the brain but the size of the eggs that females can produce. Larger birds can produce larger eggs, and the offspring developing inside these eggs can develop for a much longer time due to having more nutrients. Thus, when they hatch, they are much more prepared for life and can easily survive on their own. Therefore, we observe this situation regarding metabolic limits in birds as well. In summary, humans are a primate species that is born too early due to the additional problems brought by bipedalism and develops in a much delayed manner than expected. Therefore, our adults resemble the offspring of our other close cousins much more than those cousins' adults. For example, this photo shows it beautifully. In evolutionary biology, we call this phenomenon Neoteny, but the details of this are the subject of another video. However, that's why I gave you an example of sea turtles at the beginning. A human baby is even more helpless than a sea turtle hatchling, perhaps having the capacity of no more than a bug larva. But this is not a coincidence. There are very good evolutionary reasons for this that we have seen throughout this video. Human babies evolved as a fetus developing outside the womb, not to completely solve the birth difficulties that mothers face, but at least to be able to save them. We can see the genetic traces of this evolution in rapidly evolving gene regions, such as FSH receptor genes, which directly affect when birth will occur. It's a bit strange to think this way, but we usually attribute our evolution to the sacrifices and coping abilities of our adult ancestors. However, if we have such a large brain today, perhaps we should thank not only our adult ancestors but also our ancestors' babies. If they had not evolved to be born early at the cost of helplessness, maybe we would not have this civilization today. Until the next video, goodbye.